Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our third webinar honoring February as Teen Dating Violence Prevention Month. We are so thankful that you are here joining us today for another great conversation with our colleagues from Bloom 365. Today, we are joined by Donna and Gray, and we're just very grateful for all that we're about to learn from you. So Donna and Gray, I will kick it off to you. Thanks again.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone from Maricopa County Association of Governments, especially the Domestic Violence Council, for putting on this webinar series this month, February, Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, when we go orange to raise awareness, validate young survivors, show our support, and hopefully spark some meaningful conversations. We're so happy to have you join us again this evening. We are jumping into our third webinar as part of our webinar series. So before we get into this webinar, we're going to give a quick overview of who we are, what we do. And then tonight, we're really going to be talking about risk factors, the things that make young people most at risk for using verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual violence in their dating relationships and in relationships in general. So by a show of hands for our attendees who are with us tonight, please raise your hand. And if you don't know how to do that in Zoom, you'll either see it at the bar at the bottom of your screen, or you'll see three dots all the way to the right of that bar. It says more, click on that. And then there's a raise hand function. So raise your hand if you are joining us again, if you have gone through our other webinars and you're coming back for some more. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us again. And for those of you who weren't able to join us live for our first webinars, they have been recorded and will be populated on the MAG website, or YouTube channel rather, so you'll be able to capture them and catch up on anything that you may have missed. All right, so let's get started. Bloom 365, again, is partnering with the Maricopa County Association of Governments Domestic Violence Council to run these webinars, and our work is specifically in the lane of teen dating violence, domestic violence, sexual violence prevention, specifically working with Gen Z youth, those between the ages of 11 and 24. Our mission is to prevent abuse before it starts, and our vision is safe and healthy relationships for all. Our big goal, or our big, hairy, audacious goal, is to uproot abuse in a generation. Our name is our promise. Bloom 365 is an acronym that stands for Bring Love on Others More, 365 days a year. Our work, our programs, our services, our prevention education in schools, our direct services for young people who have experienced victimization, who have witnessed victimization, whether it's domestic violence, sexual violence, or teen dating violence, as well as young people who are using violence. All that we do at Bloom 365 to meet our mission follows this prevention pipeline of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention efforts prevent abuse before it begins. So educating a whole generation before harm occurs about healthy versus unhealthy relationships and how to seek help if they're recognizing those red flags or risk factors in themselves before harm occurs. Secondary prevention is reducing the risk of harm to self or others and interrupting abuse from happening again. So our secondary prevention measures are interventions and counseling and peer groups for young people, again, between the ages of 11 and 24, who are exhibiting those violent or abusive behaviors. So interrupting it so harm does not continue to occur. And then tertiary prevention, focusing on inspiring healing and providing support to young people after they've experienced abuse. This is what's also called after harm care. Traditionally, in this work to end teen dating violence and other forms of interpersonal violence, the majority of effort and attention and money specifically has been invested in tertiary prevention. So we want to make sure that we are completing the whole pipeline. And part of those efforts is to make sure that we are also working to prevent abuse before it starts. So that is what we do. As we're going through this, if you could take a few moments to introduce yourself in the chat, if you are up for it. We'd love to know who's joining us this afternoon, what brought you here, if you're with a specific organization, if you have teens in your life, and if so, anything that you want to share, please go ahead and put that in the chat so that we can start building some community so that we know who is here. Throughout this webinar series, you will be meeting many of our team members at Bloom 365. I'll kick it off with an introduction of who I am and then pass it over to Gray, who's also joining me tonight from our team. So again, my name is Donna Bartos. I am the founder and CEO of Bloom 365. I started this organization in 2006 because as a survivor of teen dating violence, of witnessing domestic violence as a child, and also experiencing childhood sexual assault, I wished that Bloom 365 was available for me. I wish these resources were available not only in my schools, but also in the community to support my mother as she was going through domestic violence, my siblings as we were all witnessing it, and most importantly, I wish that there were resources available for the people who harmed me, the dating partners, the individuals in my life who utilized abusive, controlling, and violent behaviors to harm me. And it didn't exist. So in 2006, I started this organization, and here we are almost 2 decades later, doing this incredible work with a staff of just under 15 and partnering with schools and community organizations and military installations now across Arizona, across the country, and soon globally. So I'm really excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to introduce to you Gray Lynn, who is on our team, and Gray will share a little bit about who she is.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Gray Kamnitzer. I am the Program Director of Student Safety Services with Bloom 365. So I handle the maintaining of all of our school-based relationships, scheduling our very important healthy relationship curricula with all school partners, and then also running what we call our coordinated community response teams on campuses. These teams are multidisciplinary teams that meet together just to ensure that policies are formed in ways that are youth-centered and making sure that the youth who are experiencing interpersonal violence or causing that interpersonal violence are being met with proper protocols. One of the reasons that I joined this organization and why I love the work that I do is because I was actually one of those young people who was using some of that power and control within relationships that I had due to experiencing the root cause of insecurity quite a whole lot. So I wish I would have had the resources and the knowledge and the tools that we now give young people in Generation Z through our healthy relationship curricula. So that's one of my big driving points and why I'm passionate about what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gray. And thank you to those of you who are introducing yourselves in the chat. It looks like we have a little bit of a presence from some military folks. Welcome. So excited you chose to join us. And the individual that mentioned about some partnerships with the AOC, absolutely, we will follow up with you on that. So thank you for putting that in the chat. I'm going to deactivate my camera as I'm going through these slides because my computer's having some memory challenges. So when my camera is running, I run a little slow here, but I'll pop back on as we wrap up this webinar series. Okay, so again, we are going to focus on who is at risk for teen dating violence in webinar 3. We're going to cover risk and protective factors. What are those factors that increase the risk or the potential likelihood that a young person would exhibit or use violence behaviors or abusive tactics that lead to teen dating violence? Verbal, emotional, physical, sexual violence, coercion. And then protective factors. What are the things that research says young people need to protect them from using violence? We're going to touch a little bit on adverse childhood experiences and how they influence these risk factors. Review a little bit, not too deep into detail, but really just lens over what social determinants of health are and how they relate to alleviating the risk or reducing the risk that a young person could become abusive or violent. And then Gray is going to lead us through a conversation in the chat on the barriers to help seeking or seeking help that teens experiencing teen dating violence often face. And then as far as teens' perspectives, we will show a video in a bit that really amplifies the voices of teens. It's tough to get teens to participate in these type of things with all of their after school activities. But in future webinars here, we've got a couple more to go. We will have some more teen advocates joining us. But tonight, since they couldn't join us, we are going to show a video so that we are amplifying their voices as best as possible. And just a sensitive content warning, there is no sugarcoating when we talk about teen dating violence. So throughout this webinar, we will be sharing information with you and having a discussion about topics related to teen dating abuse, domestic violence, and sexual assault, and other forms of power and control-based violence. These, of course, are uncomfortable issues to talk about, and chances are you or someone you know may have been impacted by these issues. So we encourage you to take care of yourself throughout. If you need to take a break, that's okay. This is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to catch it if by chance it's just too much for you to go through right now. At Bloom 365, we utilize a system called the elephant in the room. And typically when we are doing our in-person trainings or our trainings with young people, there are questions, there are comments that they just feel uncomfortable sharing, but are relevant and they just want to get off their chest. So if you have an uncomfortable question or something that you want to share, feel free, you can use the chat. But if you wanted to do this anonymously, you can either take a photo of that QR code and that will take you to our elephant in the room card digital form, which is confidential, or you can utilize the link that Gray put in the chat for any of those questions or comments that you just don't feel comfortable sharing. Go ahead and utilize that. And before we wrap up this month of webinars, our advocates will respond, and we will respond to those on our website at our FAQ page. If you are curious to know what young people are saying, the questions that they're asking, the comments that they're sharing with us after they go through our prevention education curriculum in their schools or community organizations or military installations, you can check that out at that link on our website. So it's bloom365.org /FAQS. If you're just curious to know what teens are saying. Of course, we remove any identifiable information. And if there are times when teens don't want us to share what they write on the cards, we certainly do not do that. So just a refresher, teen dating violence defined is physical, sexual, or psychological emotional abuse within a dating relationship among adolescents. It stems from power and control. An individual using their power to control a dating partner and using those tactics of abuse and violence that we uncovered in webinar 1. So isolation, intimidation, humiliation, physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial control, etc. When we look at the statistics of teen dating violence, it's very important for all of us and we adults who work with young people to understand that statistics are only as good as those who are participating in the surveys or where we're getting the data and information from. So when we look at reports of teen dating violence, these are actual young people reporting that they have experienced teen dating violence. In 2017, the National Survey on Teen Relationships and Intimate Violence indicated through results from teens that 60% of them have experienced teen dating violence. So that's verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual violence in a dating relationship. You might also hear the statistic out there of 1 in 3 or 1/3 of teens have experienced abuse. That number, again, has been used since the 90s. We do know that when we talk about physical violence, that statistic completely aligns with physical violence. And this statistic is more inclusive of verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual violence in a dating relationship. Okay, so let's start with reviewing adverse childhood experiences. By a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, research or information? Has anyone been exposed to or been through a training, understand what these are? So it looks like we've got about maybe 4 of our attendees who have. So for those of you who are not familiar with what ACEs are, These are traumatic events that occur during a person's childhood. So when we look at adverse childhood experience research, this initial study was done from 1995 to 1997. It was commissioned by Kaiser Permanente. And what they were looking at initially was the correlation between trauma in childhood and youth who were experiencing obesity. And what they found was obesity as an adverse reaction or response or health concern because of high rates of ACEs. So you'll see here, ACEs are categorized into 3 sections. We have on the left side of your screen, abuse. So physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. And then we have neglect, physical, emotional neglect. And then household challenges, mental illness, parent treated violently, divorce, incarcerated relative, or substance abuse. Now, the data on this research, it's just important to point out, it doesn't say that if you've experienced ACEs that you are automatically going to be abusive or violent. But there is emerging research that shows that if you have experienced any of these ACEs, and it's specifically 4 or more, that you will be more at risk for using violence. At the end of this webinar, we will share with you a resource folder. In that resource folder is what's called our Trusted Adult Ally Toolkit. In that toolkit, we've included the ACEs survey. If you've never taken the ACEs quiz yourself, I know when I took it, it was an eye-opener for me, and it made sense as to why I experienced many of the adverse health outcomes that some still, almost as a 50-year-old, that I'm still dealing with. So you'll see here that there are 10 of them. There is new research being done to look at potentially cultural trauma and societal trauma. We don't have that research yet, but it is emerging. Times change, communities change. And so looking at how more societal and cultural trauma plays into adverse childhood experiences. We know that 1 in 6 students come to school with 4 or more ACEs. We also know that there is hope. Science shows the effect of ACEs do not have to be permanent. And the work that we do at Bloom 365 is to reduce the potential adverse outcomes of ACEs. We see adverse childhood experiences show up daily in our elephant in the room cards. Again, students are given a blank elephant in the room card, and anyone who goes through our trainings has the opportunity to share what they want. And we do see thousands of indicators that adverse childhood experiences are still happening and that students are still experiencing them in our local schools and in schools nationally, and even within military installations too, where we're engaging young people. So this one says, my dad was emotionally abusive towards my mom before they divorced. So this growing body of research out there has evidence that early childhood experiences can have a significant impact on outcomes later in life. And here are some of those potential adverse outcomes that individuals may be at risk for later in life into adulthood because of exposure to ACEs. So drug and alcohol use, teen pregnancy, depression, diabetes and heart disease, suicidal ideation, severe obesity, STDs, and domestic violence. I want to pause here just for a moment and go back to this slide. How many of you, when you look at this, how many of these adverse childhood experiences, so currently on the screen there are 10, out of the 10, how many of these do you feel are a crime? So go ahead and count up the numbers of the 10 ACEs that you feel are a crime or are viewed as a crime. And go ahead and put that number in the chat. I'm curious to know what you come up with. So we have 5. All of them. 4. Anyone else? 7, but 2 are doubled. 3. Okay. So now let's go back to this statistic. 1 in 6 students come to school with 4 or more ACEs. If you are working with students in schools or with young people, chances are you are working with crime victims. And we don't view this as it. Sometimes ACEs, and in some places, are viewed as this just inevitable part of growing up, that kids experience adversity, they're resilient, they will get through it. So when we start to reframe our thinking around ACEs, and we really look at this statistic that 1 in 6 students, and I can tell you that in the trainings that I've done with military engaged junior service members and young service members, the majority of them anonymously share that they have experienced 6 or more adverse childhood experiences. So in our biggest institutions and in the places in our community where we are reaching and connecting with large numbers of young people in Gen Z, we are connecting with victims of crime. And we don't think of it that way because this has become so normalized. And also, ACEs and teen dating violence, domestic violence, and sexual violence related issues are often in the shadows of these other challenges that we hear more about, that we see more campaigns rallying to prevent. We see more money getting invested in drug and alcohol use prevention and teen pregnancy prevention and mental health resources and suicidal ideation prevention. We're seeing lots of money and severe obesity. My goodness, if you scroll, social media or anywhere, the advertisements, if you've ever had a conversation with someone about weight, I don't know if you've picked up on this, but our phones are smart and they hear us. Chances are you're going to be getting ads about every single weight loss program that is out there. But what is missing from this public attention, we're getting better, but we're not there yet, is that same level of awareness and heightening of consciousness around teen dating violence, domestic violence, and sexual violence. So we have a lot more work to do to amplify these conversations and to make preventing these forms of interpersonal violence a priority across the board. So in the absence of resilient factors, exposure to adversity and related trauma during childhood can increase the risk of violence perpetration. Again, it's not a direct correlation. I myself experienced 6 ACEs as a kid. I have not perpetrated violence. So if we were to make that leap and say, if you experience 4 or more ACEs, you're going to be violent, we're not going to be accurate, but it can and does influence the risk factors that young people experience that do have a correlation to them using violence. That QR code will take you to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website, where you can find more information on adverse childhood experiences. So those ACEs are influences on these risk factors. And risk factors are the factors that increase the risk for, again, a young person becoming violent or abusive. And what we need to do more of as trusted adults, as parents, as teachers, as community members engaging with young people, is not only focus on providing support and resources after harm has occurred to those who are experiencing teen dating violence and other forms of interpersonal violence, but we need to start banding together as communities, especially communities that have the potential for big impact, with removing the following risk factors. So these are the most common risk factors that the Centers for Disease Control say influence the behaviors and actions of young people, which make them more at risk for perpetrating teen dating violence and other forms of interpersonal violence. Poor coping, communication, or social skills, belief in rigid and toxic gender roles, which we talked about in webinar 2, use of alcohol or drugs. I just want to pause here and make the distinction that alcohol or drugs do not cause teen dating violence. They may exasperate, but often those who are controlling, abusive, or violent are already controlling, abusive, or violent without the use of alcohol or drugs. It just might elevate that abuse, and specifically that physical or sexual abuse. History of bullying others or being bullied, association with violent peers and or exposure to violence, where teen dating violence and other forms of violence are normalized and tolerated. Maltreatment or instability as a child. So this is where those childhood trauma experiences come in. Low self-esteem and or a sense of powerlessness. Lack of parental support and supervision. Use of aggressive media. So I'm going to pause here again. Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, video games that are violent do not make kids violent. However, if they have these other risk factors at play and those root causes that we talked about during webinar 2, then they may be desensitized to violence and may view the world from the lens that the way to gain and maintain power and control is through violence, which is promoted and tolerated and the core to aggressive types of media. But again, a young person playing a violent video game, we cannot say because of the video games they are violent. We have to look at the whole picture and determine what risk factors are present in the life of that young person that would lead them to making the choice of harming someone else. This research, I believe, is research that anybody who wants to prevent the next school shooting, the next mass shooting, should pay attention to and should work together in community and even at the family level to figure out how do we remove these risk factors and identify these common characteristics that school shooters hold, identify these early on so that we do not have any more tragedies like the ones we have seen over the years. So like we talked about during webinar 2, 98% of school shooters are male. This statistic, we are not saying that all men are lethally violent. What we are saying is when it comes to school shootings, 98% of those perpetrators are male. And this information comes from the FBI and the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center. These statistics might change over time as we continue to track this information, but this is where they are today. So number 2 of the 8 common characteristics, 68.2% of school shooters killed family members or intimate partners and or had a history of domestic or sexual violence. So I encourage you when these situations happen to let the dust settle a little bit and continue to follow up on these stories. And chances are what you're going to find out as more information that is available to the public is released, you will see that young people who are shooting their peers and murdering and killing their peers in schools and the adults in schools oftentimes have a thread of domestic, sexual, or teen dating violence in their immediate past history. 80% access their firearms from family members. Most experienced early childhood trauma and exposure to violence at an early age. 66% have a history of suicidal ideation and or depression. Most went through a significant life stressor within 5 years. And that life stressor could be their dating partner ended the relationship. And they didn't have those communication and coping skills or that strong sense of self or positive self-esteem and felt powerless and out of control and took their ex-dating partner's life and sometimes most oftentimes their own. Often these teen dating violence situations that turn lethal are teen dating violence, murder, suicides. Most communicated their threats online. And the one common thread among all of them all feel powerless and inflict harm on others to gain a false sense of power and control. This is their motive. So if in the future you see or read a news story or hear people having conversations about any form of violence, and you see a headline or you see a part throughout that news story or article that says, law enforcement still are trying to figure out the motive, or there doesn't seem to be a motive. The motive is always power and control. We know what that motive is, and we need to do a better job of, as the adults in the lives of young people, to circumvent that abuse of power and control. Okay. So as adults interacting with young people, this is just to recap a little bit of what we did during webinar number 1. Here are some of the most common warning signs that indicate that your teen or the teens that you work with or interact with on a daily basis may be at risk for harming others. Keep an eye on poor academic performance and or excessive absenteeism. Now, there might be other things going on in their life that has nothing to do with a risk of being violent, but we do see that these are often those red flag behaviors that are missed. Aggressive outburst, suicidal ideation, coercive, controlling, or abusive behaviors toward peers and or dating partners, fascination with firearms, violence, and or terroristic activities, not talking about kids who go shooting, go to the range or are hunting or hunters with their families, but a fascination that is concerning with firearms, violence, and or terroristic activities. There's a case study about Nicholas Cruz, who was the young person who was the shooter in the Parkland shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. And when you now go back and that we have more access to information about what led to that violent tragedy, we see many of these red flags were present, but they were missed. No one put them all together to say, we need an intervention, and we need an intervention now, because this young person is a threat to harming mass numbers of their peers and people. Communicates threats or harm to self or others in online posts, text, drawings, journal writings, and or in conversations with peers and family members. We collaborate with schools and work with them, especially their student support staff and social workers who are navigating measures to intervene and to intervene well for students who are on threat assessment lists, the kiddos who are a threat to harming their peers or harming others. And what we're hearing is lots of those students are writing and drawing out what they want to do, keeping hit lists. Lots of them have unhealthy relationships with their peers, don't feel validated, don't feel seen, don't feel heard, don't feel wanted by maybe someone that they want to date. So these things are all connected. Then we've got isolated and socially withdrawn, non-compliance with rules. Again, we've got kids who don't follow the rules. Maybe school rules just aren't for them. So that's not just one red flag, but if you catch and see these other red flags or risk factors going on, then that's when the heightened awareness needs to happen among the adults in the lives of these young people to determine, do we need to explore this more? Exhibits possessive jealousy or stalking behaviors. So where is the hope in all of this? What can we all do as adults in the lives of teens and young people? Reduce these risk factors, prevent them from happening to begin with, and get to a place where truly teen dating violence is not a major public health issue or concern. So protective factors are the factors that protect against and reduce the risk of becoming abusive or violent. The Centers for Disease Control lists them, and these are the most common, which include parental support, supervision, and family connectedness, which goes along with stability, the ability to show and feel empathy, healthy communication and coping skills, high educational aspirations. This isn't saying wanting to have straight A's or being the best in the class. This is more having a desire to learn, having a desire to collect in new knowledge, whether it's academically or in a trade or with skills. Access to caring and trusted adults at school or in the community, positive peer relationships, and then communities and laws that support violence prevention, positive self-esteem and confidence. And then we also have some additional ones that you don't see here that are important to note: mastery of a nonviolent skill, sport, and/or hobby, sense of belonging at school, a safe home environment free of abuse and violence, and just commitment to doing well and having that motivation to just be a good human. So these are some of the most important protective factors that we all as adults in the lives of young people can help promote and amplify. There's a lot of research out there that says if a young person, if a child or a teen has access to just one caring and encouraging adult in their life, that can make all the difference in the world for them. So you may be that trusted adult in the life of a young person. So these adverse childhood experiences, these risk factors, and these protective factors all tie back into what's called the social determinants of health. These are the social factors that shape our individual health, but also shape the health of our relationships, the communities that we're engaging in, and society as a whole. They include education, economic stability, and then other related conditions where a young person lives, works, and plays. These are important. Access to care, access to quality care, access to support services like those that we offer at Bloom 365, or maybe that you offer in your organizations, is a protective factor in and of itself. So this is very complex. This issue, there is not a one-size-fits-all response or solution to ending and preventing teen dating violence. And our solutions really need to focus back on those risk factors. What risk factors are at play in the lives of the teens and young people that we are interacting with on a daily basis? What protective factors are missing? And what can we do together to reduce those risk factors and improve those protective factors? I have a question for you before we move on with our conversation about barriers to help seeking. How many of you, by a show of hands, had your vision or hearing checked when you were in school? Just by a show of hands. Did you ever have your vision or hearing checked? Maybe even your spine checked. Maybe they checked your spine for scoliosis when you went to school. I remember when I was a kid attending school, every year I would come home with this permission slip that the school nurse and the nuns at my school, I went to a Catholic school, that they had permission to check my vision, check my hearing, and check my spine. And I remember as a kid thinking it was really odd that the school nurse with her really cold hands would lift my shirt and put her hands down my spine, but my parents approved, and that was it. What if there was something in place where there was a screening to determine, is this child experiencing trauma at home? Does this child have risk factors at play? Well, I know this gets into confidentiality and privacy and all of that. But just think about if we had that kind of cultural and social and policy shift in our schools, in our communities, in our state, in our country, what type of harm reduction could we do if we were able to spot and identify risk factors that were present early on and wrap our arms around the kids who need more support by reducing those risk factors and putting in place the protective factors that were missing in their lives? What if? What if we had that solution? Well, we don't yet. So as adults, we need to do more collaborating, more understanding what young people are up against, and showing up to be as much of a support, non-judgmental support as possible. So with that, now that you have more information on risk factors and protective factors, Gray is going to lead us in a conversation regarding help seeking.
All right. So before we start to talk about what are the various, barriers for or reasons why a young person is not reaching out for that help if they're witnessing or experiencing any form of interpersonal violence, I want to ask you all to share in the chat. I have a question here, so we can go ahead to the next slide. So what percentage of teens, when it comes to witnessing or experiencing that teen dating violence or that sexual violence, what percentage of those teens do you all think actually seek formal help from an adult? So give me some guesses in the chat. What are some percentages? 1%, 15%, 5%. Any other guesses before we do our grand reveal here? 0%. All right, we can go ahead and go to the next one. So we do know that only about 9% of teens who reported experiencing or witnessing that interpersonal violence, only 9% of those young people were actually seeking out formal help from an adult after that victimization occurred. Now, 80% of those teens who were surveyed, of the 36,000 teens that were surveyed within Maricopa County, 80% of those teens said that they were more likely to go to their friends about these issues than adults. So now let's have a conversation. I'm going to have you all brainstorm on these various couple questions and share with me in the chat your thought on these things. So what are some of those reasons why that teen who is experiencing or witnessing domestic violence, sexual violence, or teen dating violence, why are they not reaching out to adults for help? So go ahead and share in the chat, what are those barriers to seeking help? What are those reasons why that young person is not going to go to an adult for help? So we have ashamed, embarrassed, maybe they're afraid. Absolutely. What else do you all think? Feeling shame, afraid someone is going to get in trouble. Again, being ashamed, afraid that adult will get the other kid in trouble. Absolutely. So a lot of the times, us as adults, we experience and we see young people going through these rough experiences, and we go into this fix-it mode, where a lot of the times maybe we just decide how we're going to handle the situation. And unfortunately, we're missing the opportunity to allow that young person to share with us how they would like the situation to be handled. We might maybe escalate things by doing that. Maybe the adult is the one causing that harm. Absolutely. And it is seen as normal behavior. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the times young people are told that they're too young to experience these types of issues. They don't know that they should report these things. Maybe they're unsure of it being abuse. Absolutely. So that brings up a lot of that taught abusive behavior or that exposure to violence. They see what's happening to them or happening to others as the norm. They don't know that there's any other expectations that should be had within relationships. They think that's how all relationships are to be had. And they have maybe no trust due to other trauma perpetrated by adults. Absolutely. So maybe they don't have those trusted adult allies, or maybe in the past, they went to somebody about this and that adult did not respond to them in a way that centered them or showed that they even cared that that young person was experiencing that. So I have another question for us here. Thank you for responding to that. How many of you, when we're talking about this teen victim here, how many of you pictured that teen who was experiencing that victimization as a female? So go ahead and raise your hand. How many of us maybe automatically pictured that teen victim being female? So a couple of us. So we do know that there are statistics that show, that it does occur very much so for female presenting people. We know that 13% of female high school students report sexual dating violence, and that 1 in 11 female high school students report physical dating violence. However, we know, unfortunately, interpersonal violence does not discriminate, which leads me to my next question here. What if that teen who is experiencing that victimization is a male? What are some additional barriers that that young person might be experiencing that might make it so he's less likely to reach out to somebody for help if he's witnessing or experiencing these things? So what are some additional barriers if this teen victim is male. Why is he not reaching out for help? And you can go ahead and share in the chat. So maybe they're told to man up. Absolutely. They don't want to feel weak or seen as not manly. Absolutely. So, some of those gender norms, right? Don't be a wussy. Maybe they're feeling ashamed that they should be able to control it, that they're less manly for experiencing those things. Absolutely. Social stigma of what masculinity is. Yeah, that's definitely very much so the case. Cultural concerns. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one? All right, let's go ahead to the next one. All right, so we know that only 2% of male 2% of male high school students reported sexual dating violence, and that 1 in 15 male high school students reported physical dating violence. Now, there are some stats here, but we know that because of a lot of these barriers to help seeking, that we might not be accurately getting the percentage or getting all of those disclosures from males who are experiencing these things. And that's why we need to normalize having these elephant in the room conversations and addressing interpersonal violence. So All right, so over here, and I might let Donna tell the story of this card, but this is a card that we actually got from a student in the past at a high school that we were going to, and he shared with us a series of cards talking about experiencing himself some of those unhealthy gender norms and how that affected his ability to talk about some of the interpersonal violence issues that were happening at home for him. So this card specifically, it says, when you're getting abused, but you're a boy, so you have to grow up and be a man. Donna, do you want to share this story a little bit for us?
Sure. And we're going to show a video here. So this card, and as Gray mentioned, a series of cards with some artwork and some very powerful and profound statements on them, came through in one of the schools that we had first started delivering our 7-dose or 7-lesson high school health education and healthy relationship curriculum in. So this student took their time to create this series of cards that you will see in the video. And we do not usually, it is not our protocol to seek out the student who wrote a card or wrote anything on a card. Now, if they exhibit that they are a threat to themselves or someone else, that's a different protocol. But for this, it was very clear that the student had a lot to say, and they had a talent for drawing and creating memes and just an artistic ability that was extraordinary. We had received a small mini grant to do a summer project with students to do some art and meme creating that were relevant to our mission. So I thought, wow, we don't know what class, we knew what class this came from, but we didn't know what student it was. So what I did was I took this card, took a screenshot of it, sent it to all of the health education teachers at this school and asked them in all of their classes if they wouldn't mind putting this up on the whiteboard in the beginning of the day of their class, and ask if the student that created this artwork had interest that Bloom 365 had a paid summer internship artistic awareness project, if they were interested to reach out to us. So they gave my contact information. The next day I get an email that pretty much says, hey, Miss Bloom, what do you want? This is so-and-so, and you wanted to talk to me. And so I had coordinated a time to meet with this student. And in a week or so, they came to our office and they brought their mom. And we had all of the cards out on our coffee table in our little gathering area. And the student came in by themselves first and wanted to know the details and how much they were going to get paid, of course. So we shared what it was, and then asked, we had asked if mom could come in because this student was a minor. We would need mom to sign off on the agreement that the student would be doing some work for hire projects for us. So mom came in, and mom did not see the cards. And I asked the student, is it okay? Do you want your mom to see the cards? And they said, yeah, I think she should see them. So mom shared and broke down and shared what was going on in their life. The student's dad had recently left the home, not by choice. because of domestic violence, and they did not know how they were going to make ends meet because the father was the primary income earner for the family. The student had a younger sibling, and so mom had thanked us and said that she had no idea that her teen had this kind of talent. So enough from me. You're going to hear this teen story at the beginning of this video, and this is where we're bringing in the voices and the experiences of young people. So take a look at the cards and see if you are noticing any of those adverse childhood experiences being communicated, any of those risk factors being communicated. And then at the end, there's a really big question that the students are asking. So our friends at MAG, would you mind playing the video since I had some challenges the last time with my videos?
A little bit about what inspired you to do the cards.
Well, originally what inspired me to do the cards was we could write anything we wanted on the cards, and at least one person would read the card. They don't have to be known. They don't have to go in person to go talk to someone. It's really hard for some guys to show vulnerability. I'm kind of like this too, where you don't want to reach out to ask for help because it makes you look weak. And you know, it's like you try to talk with other guys about, hey, this thing's happening. This, this is a problem I have. This is something I need help with. A lot of the responses you get aren't very helpful because they'll say, oh, well, just tough up, bro. Just man up, man. Come on. No one gets to see or hear about your problems. So I thought, now is my chance. And now I'm here.
Is LGBTQ plus safe here? Numerous students in the class believe against the community, and I do not feel safe here.
When getting abused by your dating partner and they threaten you to kill you or one of your family, if you say anything, what do I do?
I wish I had known the warning signs before I took the relationship further.
My dad was emotionally abusive towards my mom before they divorced.
Instead of how many people experienced the abuse, how many people did the abuse?
I have an abusive friend, and I don't know how to get her out of my life.
What should I do if I know the perpetrator and they're my friend?
Bloom 365 helped me because when I first started dating this girl, I didn't realize that I was controlling the relationship. Now I'm not.
Can an abuser ever change?
All right, so Yeah, it's a very powerful video. This oftentimes too, that a video I just want to share when we're in classrooms with students and young people at the various schools that we go to. A lot of the times that video is the point where we receive quite a few elephant in the room cards. We see an influx in them because the students are recognizing that, oh, this is a safe place for me to start to actually talk about some of these things that I'm experiencing. So yeah, it's very, very powerful. So in reflecting on that barriers to seeking help conversation now, I want to ask you all, what if that teen who is experiencing that victimization identifies as a part of the LGBTQIA community? What are some additional barriers that that young person might be facing to actually seeking out that help if they're witnessing or experiencing any of that interpersonal violence? And we can go ahead and share in the chat just any of those additional barriers. Yeah, they may not be out. So a great point there, Kelly. So in order for them to talk about what had happened to them, they would have to reveal perhaps who their partner is, and maybe they've not told people that they're a part of that community. They're not ready to do that yet. They may not be taken seriously. Absolutely. I know some of the time too, they're afraid maybe more harm will be caused towards them if they come forward about that experience. Yeah, so they may not want to share because they don't want the community to look bad. Absolutely. Definitely. All right, so we know that the statistics here are that 31% of LGBTQ plus high school students, they reported experiencing that sexual dating violence, and that 1 in 4 LGBTQ plus high school students reported experiencing physical dating violence. So we just want to highlight some more vulnerable populations, again, to experiencing some of these interpersonal violence issues. So we know that LGBTQ plus youth are 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than their non-LGBTQ plus peers. And we know that youth with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than their peers without a disability. So that leads me to another barriers to seeking help question here. What if the teen who is experiencing that victimization has a disability? What are some additional barriers to seeking help that that young person might face? So go ahead and share that in your chat, in the chat box. So again, this is a young person with a disability of any type. If they're experiencing that victimization. Okay, yeah. So the fear of maybe feeling misunderstood by others, or that they're not going to be understood. Any other thoughts? The disability may physically prevent a way to communicate. Absolutely. Yeah, they might be nonverbal. I know a lot of the times too, it might be that maybe their main care provider or their caregiver is the one causing that harm. They don't know how, yeah, and they might not recognize that what they're experiencing is that interpersonal violence maybe. So we know that these are some of the barriers to seeking help for people with disabilities. So they might not know who they can trust, who they can report to about these things, not understanding what happened to them. The reporting process is pretty complex. Communication barriers. So again, that nonverbal, maybe they're hard of hearing, deaf. Resources are not accessible, so they need resources in Braille or interpreters, or they need to utilize communication devices, fear of backlash from that perpetrator, the fear they won't be believed, transportation barriers, and they may not have evidence. So teens with disabilities also have the right to healthy and safe relationships. We know that more than 1 in 5 young people with disabilities between the ages of 12 and 19 reports experiencing violence, including physical abuse, rape, or sexual assault from a stranger or a partner, more than twice the rate of youth without that disability. People of all ages with disabilities are more likely to face violence from an intimate partner. So compared to youth without disabilities, youth with disabilities were more likely to report coercive sex, forced sex, and sexual abuse. So 18.6% of them were reporting that coercive sex versus 12.1% for young people without a disability. 13.2% of them reported experiencing that forced sex versus 7.9% without a disability. And 8.4% of them reported experiencing sexual abuse versus 4.8% of youth without disabilities reporting that. Are there any additional barriers to seeking help that we haven't yet covered that you think might impact a young person's ability to seek help if they're experiencing or witnessing any form of interpersonal violence? Anything else we haven't covered? Language barriers, yes, absolutely. So maybe all the services available are not in that person's native language. Absolutely. Location of services, absolutely, yeah. Maybe they're in a more rural community. Also, they may not have the ability to get away from their abuser to speak with someone safe. Absolutely, yeah. Transportation issues, yes. Cultural barriers, absolutely. So maybe because of their culture, it's seen as something that, you do not talk about these things, right? You don't let people know that you're experiencing those things. How to pay for services, yeah. So there could be financial things going on as well. They don't have the financial means to get services, or they don't know of ways of getting services that maybe are less costly or free. Absolutely. All right, we can move forward. So we know that in addition to barriers to seeking help, there are actually also additional barriers to actually breaking up with this person or ending this unhealthy relationship. So I want you to picture all of these things that I'm describing as hooks in this person who is experiencing that interpersonal violence within the relationship. It's keeping them hooked to this abusive partner, hooked to this unhealthy relationship. So first, we're going to start with love here. So maybe they truly love this person. We know that relationships do not typically start out as abusive. Maybe it's insecurity. So maybe the person who they're with who's causing that harm has talked them down so much and so often and told them so very often that they're never going to find anybody else who's going to deal with them the way that that person does, or, anybody to love them the way that that person does. And so they're insecure. They don't feel secure in themselves. Maybe they feel pressure by society, by their friends, by their family members, by their schoolmates to be in a relationship. So maybe everybody around them is in a relationship. So they feel like, oh, well, I have to be in a relationship too. It could be fear. Maybe they're afraid that this young person or this person that, they're in a relationship with is going to harm them or harm themselves or harm others who are trying to help them leave this relationship. Maybe it's a status thing. So a lot of the times, especially in high school situations, maybe that person they're in a relationship with is the popular kid, right? They have more friends, they have more pool at school, and now they have all these new friends because of who they're dating, and they don't want to lose that. Maybe it's isolation occurring. So maybe this person who they're in a relationship with has deterred them or dissuaded them from interacting with the people and the things that bring them that happiness. And so they're afraid that, I don't have anybody to go to if I leave this relationship. And maybe there's hope too. So they hope that this person is going to change, that they're not going to do these things anymore. So I want you to picture now, let's say we're able to unhook all of these things. So they don't love this person anymore. They don't have that hope. They're secure with themselves. They've reconnected to those important people. We've removed all these hooks. There are still 2 hooks that are going to be pretty hard to remove from this situation that have been established in this unhealthy relationship. And that's that power and control. It can be very hard to unhook that power and control that's been established there. So my next question here, what about that teen who is using or perpetrating that violence? What are some reasons or additional barriers as to why this young person, the one who is causing that harm, why are they not reaching out for help with these situations? Go ahead and share in the chat. So why might this young person who's the one causing harm not reach out for help? They don't want to get in trouble. Absolutely. They don't recognize what they're doing is wrong. Yes. So that leads again to that taught abusive behavior. That kind of relationship behavior is normalized, maybe in all of the other relationships they've ever been exposed to. And so they don't see anything different with that relationship. Lack of self-awareness to what they're doing. Yep. They have a family history of this and they don't know who to turn to when they realize it's wrong. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really great point there, Kelly. So they might then all of a sudden have the realization that this isn't healthy. But if my parents, if my family members, my cousins, everybody I know is doing the same thing, how am I going to come to them and say, oh, well, what we've been doing is not right? Absolutely. And I want to point out here too, that a lot of the times these young people who are causing harm within those relationships, we know that they're feeling a sense of powerlessness. And when you're feeling a sense of powerlessness, you're going to do anything you can to gain and maintain that power and control that you establish within those relationships. And so, you know, if I come forward about this, I'm going to potentially lose that person I'm in a relationship with, and I'm going to lose that power and control that I maintain. That makes me, you know, feel in a place of power where maybe all other aspects of my life, I feel powerless. Absolutely. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So I will let Donna take over.
Thank you so much, Gray, and thank you all for participating in that conversation. The one thing that I want to point out too that is also a really big barrier, and you touched on it a bit in the chat, but just to reiterate that most programs and services that focus on youth services in this lane of work, teen dating violence prevention and response, have been created by adults and have been created from an adult-centered mindset and framework versus a youth or teen-centered mindset or framework. And when the programs and services that are being offered to young people, especially teens, do not speak their language, do not get their vibe, do not listen to what they want and what they feel would be helpful, creates another big barrier for them with accessing support. And so at Bloom 365, well, our organization started as an adult-centered organization. We now educate and activate and train and engage young people as peer advocates who do their best to inform our work so that we know that our peer support groups are cool, so that our staff show up in a way where they know that this is a trusted person. This is someone who gets them. This is someone who's not going to judge them or tell them what to do. At our organization, we do not tell teens what to do. We walk alongside them as they're finding their way and provide that specific non-judgmental and confidential support for them. So I make that distinction because if you are in an organization that serves youth, but you're feeling like your curriculum or your programs and services are not fully youth or teen informed, we're here as a resource. We can help you out and help you enhance that level of your work. So to wrap up, what can concerned parents do to prevent their teen from becoming a threat to others? Or maybe you are a support person in the life of a teen. So screen and intervene often. Know what signs and red flags to look out for. Assess your child or teen's risk factors for violent behavior. Assess if any protective factors are missing in their life. Modeling respect, empathy, and boundary setting at home and in your relationships. This may be hard. I know, I was not always the good role model for conflict resolution or communicating or, listening to my kids. I have 3 children, 2 are young adults and 1 is a tween. And I learned a lot with my 2 young adults that I wish I knew with, when they were little, but learned along the way. And now our tween or 12-year-old is able to communicate feelings without outbursts and knows fully why harm occurs and how to be empathetic to her peers that might be harming others, but also know that there is accountability and consequences that need to happen too. So just modeling respect, empathy, and boundary setting is super important. Teaching your children and teens how to communicate their feelings, again, without aggression or violence. Empower your children and teens to talk to you by using level skills. So our next webinar, which will be next Wednesday on the 15th, you will, if you join us again, you will receive what's called our level response training. This is something that was created for everyday people, for parents, caregivers, community members, those who are not experts in the field of teen dating violence prevention and response, but who are working together with or working individually with young people. It was also created for teens themselves because 80% of them are going to go to each other before they go to an adult. This level training was created so that they know how to actively and empathetically listen, how to empathize, things to say, not say when someone shares that they're going through this, what validating a young person experiencing victimization looks like, how to encourage peers and the teens in your life to find that trusted adult, to seek that support, and how to link to resources and where those resources exist. And then finally, ensuring that your child's or teen's 5 points of well-being are met. These 5 points of well-being are so important. These are the things that research says teens and children need to improve and enhance their well-being. Stability. Sometimes this is hard, especially for families who are moving around a lot or who stability just doesn't seem to be attainable for them. But maybe looking at stability and determining, is being engaged in something once a week enough stability for them to meet that point of well-being. Self-esteem boosters, and working through those emotions that come when you're a teen, when again, you feel powerless, you feel unheard, you feel maybe unwanted, unseen. So working through building self-esteem at Bloom 365, one of our peer groups, our Real Talk peer support groups, has a few sessions specifically on building self-esteem peer-to-peer. Social connectedness, figuring out ways to make sure that no young person feels isolated or alone at school or in community with their peers. Right now, with COVID, it was really hard to do that when kiddos were virtual. And now that kiddos are coming back together, just figuring out how do we as adults help support that social connectedness. And a lot of times that comes down to the school culture, because if students are engaged in a school and are attending a school 5 days a week, they're spending a lot of their time with their peers. So how to encourage social connectedness to boost that well-being. Skill mastery. Now, there's data that shows if a young person has a skill that they master, it could be art, it could be dancing, it could be building computers. I don't know. That's something that can help build that self-esteem and give them something to focus on. And then, of course, most importantly, safety, making sure that our young people are safe at home, in their schools, in their communities, and online. In the link that we're going to share with you as we wrap up here, you will find in our Trusted Adult Ally Toolkit in the Google folder that you'll have access to, there are some resources such as intervention checklists that you can use if you have a young person or teen in your life that you feel might be at risk for using violence, you have that as a resource. And here is the QR code where you can access it. And we will also put in the chat a copy of the link to this resource folder. All right, with that, oh, that didn't work. I tried to copy it and it didn't work for y'all. Let me do this. There we go. We hope you will join us on Wednesday for our level webinar on how do you talk to your child or teen about teen dating violence and healthy relationships, where we're going to, again, go through our level response training. We will stick around for some questions or comments, and Kelly will hand the closing to you. Thank you all for joining us.
Well, again, we're just so thankful that you walked us through that. I think it was really eye-opening. Even as an adult, I feel like I'm fairly aware of domestic violence issues, and I learned a lot, and I really appreciate both of you being here. And Gray, a specific thank you to you for bringing your perspective to this. I think it's very helpful. So the Regional Domestic Violence Council and the Maricopa Association of Governments really extended our thank you to both of you for this work.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to people about these things. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Craig. Thank you. We will see you Wednesday.
Fantastic. And for our military engaged friends, reach out, look us up. We have a specific 3 R's peer influencer training for 18 to 24-year-old junior service members that we're now scaling across Wyoming, Army Guard installations. We're bringing it to Utah, to the Air Guard there. And so we've got some big things coming up. We would love to share that information with you.
All right, we look forward to the next webinar. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thanks so much again to Donna and Gray for the wonderful presentation this evening.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right, we'll see you at the next one. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Happy Super Bowl and Waste Management Open. Bye.